Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started with our webinar today, NG9-1-1, NENA Legacy and CAD Oh My. It's not quite as catchy as lions, tigers, and bears Oh My, but with all the fields that we deal with, sometimes it can feel as scary. So that was sort of the idea behind the name of this webinar. My name is Erin Strickler. I'm Director of Data Services here at Cloudpoint. I've been here for about 3 years. My 911 work has spanned that whole time that I've been here. Also, I lead that team and I lead the team that does our ongoing services. Normally for webinars, I'm joined by my host, Bill Steele, who is out today. So bear with me as I do this by myself. I've got about 12 screens open right now. Hopefully it all goes smoothly. But feel free to say something in the comments or in the chat box if you notice something's not right. We do 2 webinars a month, so I kind of wanted to tell you what our upcoming webinars are. Later this month, we're talking about migrating from ArcMap to ArcGIS Pro. And that'll be a good one for those of you who are interested in what we talk about today, but are still using ArcMap because what the attribute rules require ArcGIS Pro. So kind of a, I think it's a half hour, it might be an hour. It's a quick overview, but some tools to help you transition from ArcMap to ArcPro. Next is, going too far. Next is turning over a new leaf with Parcel Fabric. So we're talking about using that in Pro as well. Today I will also mention branch versioning. So that is something new-ish that is pretty powerful. And if you can leverage that, that's a good thing for your workflows. And then lastly, at the end of June, we've got creating dynamic pop-ups in ArcGIS Online, web maps, and apps. Hard to believe that I'm looking at future webinars and already talking about June. A little bit about Cloudpoint. So I've mentioned ongoing services where we supplement or are in some cases municipalities or counties GIS departments. We also service cemeteries. We have cemetery mapping service. I mentioned Parcel Fabric. We do data collection. We have 3 specialties through Esri where we're a business partner. We have the ArcGIS Indoor specialty, Release Ready, and ArcGIS Online specialty. We can implement ArcGIS Enterprise for people as well as maintain that system for them. We use our actual enterprise is on AWS Cloud, so we're familiar with that and can help organizations with that too. So I'm going to take a quick drink here. This is where Bill and I normally transition. And so we're going to move on to the actual fun part. Sorry, Bill. So let's kind of define what attribute rules are. So user-defined rules that can be used to automatically populate your attributes. They can be used to restrict editing while you're performing those operations and to perform quality assurance checks. And to define that a little bit further, you define those rules by using the arcade language. So you will have to know that a little bit, but if you know Python at all, it's fairly easy to Google the difference between the two. I do a lot of Googling in the little bit of scripting and arcade writing that I do. So that can be a good use. There's also lots of stuff that people have put online already for you to start with. And today we'll talk about some of those things that you can get started with. The rules come in 3 different names. So the first one is a calculation rule, and that is either an immediate rule or a batch rule, exactly what it sounds like. The focus of today is going to be on immediate calculation rules. I will mention the other ones here. And in another webinar sometime this fall, we're going to talk about batch calculation rules and the last one that I'll mention here. So constraint rules are where you can constrain the edits that are allowed to happen. And then validation rules help you perform those quality assurance checks. So if you've used Data Reviewer, if you use Topology, which we'll talk about here in a little bit too, it's kind of a combination of those two, if you will. And again, have a whole nother webinar on that coming up later. So where do the rules fit? So 3 years ago when I started and had my first 9-1-1 project, I was using ArcMap. And so I was using Attribute Assistant, Data Reviewer, and Topology. As we started moving to Pro, which I would recommend everybody does, because that is where Esri is putting all their development power into, I had to use attribute rules. So Data Reviewer and Topology can be used in both programs. They're a little bit different in both, have a little bit of difference in their capabilities, but they're both there in both programs. But Attribute Rule and Attribute Assistant is where that line is drawn. What we're currently using in our workflows is a combination of topology and attribute rules. And the reason we sort of dumped Data Reviewer is because we've leveraged that branch versioning in ArcGIS Enterprise and can use the validation rules that give us immediate feedback like topology does. So Data Reviewer is kind of a static feedback. With validation rules, you can have that automatic feedback to know that you've fixed an error or that maybe you inadvertently caused another one, and you can know and fix that right away. So we really do like that. I am going to share a poll here. Also my first time doing that, so hopefully that works. I'm just kind of want to get a feel for what you're using in your everyday editing. ArcMap, Pro, are you using a little bit of both or neither? And then I use and am familiar with the things we just talked about: Attribute Assistant, Topology, whether that's in ArcMap or Pro, and then Data Reviewer in ArcMap or Pro. So if you guys can vote there, I'll give you a couple minutes. Not a couple minutes, I'll give you about 30 seconds to put those answers in. Got a lot of topology in ArcMap, which is good. Attribute Assistant in ArcMap. Data Reviewer in Pro, which is good. And about 50-50 split between ArcMap and Pro, and some of you are using both, which is great. That is that's where we're at. We do find we use Pro less and less. I'm sorry, ArcMap less and less, but we do still reach back to that for some things. All right. Nobody has used attribute rules or let's see, get to the bottom there. Data Reviewer in ArcMap. Okay, well, thanks for that feedback. Let's keep going here. So the reason we're here is because with the NENA standards and maybe the CAD schema that you need to have, that can add up to a lot of fields that you need to maintain, right? So that's, again, why we reached out for attribute rules. This is an example of a client where we keep their data in the state schema. This happens to be an Illinois client, so that's what you'll see today, but these are substantially similar to Wisconsin or Missouri's state standards because we're all based on NENA, which is the end goal. So that's good. But there may be some Illinois specific things you'll see here that you won't have in your schema. So that's a lot of fields to keep track of, right? So what I want to show is that I'll just go ahead and click through here. All of those with a dot are being maintained somehow, not manually. So the green dots are those that are default values, like, you know, the object ID or the editor tracking fields that are just automatically populated. I'm sorry, those are the automatically populated ones, but then the default values are things like country, state, county, where you can start with the default. Those are always populated. And then if you need to change for whatever reason at boundaries, maybe your road center line right needs to be a different county, you can do that, but the default value will start with the one that you think you're going to use most of the time. So that takes some of the burden off. The blue dots are immediate calculation rules. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I won't have time to get through all of those, but as you can see in this particular data set, there's a lot that we can calculate automatically. We're mostly, so this is the address points, we'll look at road center lines too. We're mostly maintaining the parsed address pieces, the address number and the suffix, then the street multiplier I'm sorry, street name, pre-modifier, pre-directional, all those broken up pieces. If you maintain those in one spot, then you can use the attribute rules to populate those in other places. You could also do the opposite. If you wanted to maintain your legacy fields and have those populate the spelled out fields that the state requires, you could do that as well. The purple dots are the ones where we're pulling data from other layers. So incorporated municipality, if I've got a layer of incorporated municipality, I can pre-populate that data. That does require enterprise for that to happen. So not going to talk about that today, but that will be a topic we talk about in our final webinar, in the 911 team's final webinar of the year. So I want to look at the same thing just with road center lines. Obviously more fields here because now we've got left and right, but similar concepts where we've got some that are auto-populated or default values, and then immediate calculation, and then those immediate calculations that can happen or that need to happen with enterprise. So that is something like the ESN left and right. So if we know that that this address point or this road center line falls within this law, fire, and EMS boundary, then we can calculate that ESN from that combination if we have a table that has that information in it. That has been incredibly helpful as well. So briefly, I want to talk about writing the rules. I'm going to do the demo so that we can actually write them, but immediate calculation rules can output any value. That's different from the validation rules where the output is true or false because you're just testing against something. But these rules can be any value. You can trigger the calculation on insert, update, or delete. So when you create a new address point, let's say, when you update that address point, or maybe when you delete it, we don't use those in our current workflows, but that is an option. Then the versions you need for this. So any pro version after 2.3, if they're at 2.7 now, I would recommend keeping that up to date because they come up with new features with every release. So any version though of Pro above 2.3, and then a local file geodatabase. So your data does not need to be in enterprise to take advantage of all of this. The big caveat is that when you apply an attribute rule to a feature class, you can no longer access it in ArcMap. So for a while, we did a little bit of a dance where you can export those rules, delete them, and then you can open that feature class in ArcMap. But as we kind of put all our workflows in Pro, we don't have that anymore, but there are some workarounds, but that is something that will happen. You'll get an error. If I remember right, it's not very specific, the error that you get in ArcMap, but it does tell you it can't load it, and then you can only access that in Pro. And lastly, order matters. So they will calculate in order from top to bottom. When I get in there, I'll show you what that looks like. So if you need something, you just need to make sure your order is correct if your later calculations rely on earlier calculations. All right, so now for the fun part. I'm going to hop into Pro. First, I want to ask, does anybody have any questions? And I'm going to take a drink. Okay, feel free to ask questions as we dig into this part too, and I will try to remember to check those out. So this is a map, just sample data that we've got some address points and road center lines. I just wanted to keep this map pretty simple, so that's all I've thrown in here. It is in the Illinois data schema with, again, some additional fields for the CAD system for this particular client. Because this client is an ETSB, their main business use of this data is CAD and NG9-1-1. Obviously, if your main business uses something else, if you're a county and you service lots of different maybe internal organizations, these will still work for you. It just may look completely different as far as which fields and maybe what your feature classes are called, but this isn't specific to the state. That's just how we've got this one set up. Okay, so what I'm going to do to access the rules is right click on the feature class in the table of contents and go to Design and Attribute Rules. And we don't have any. So we're going to add a couple quickly, some easy ones just to show you the process. And then I will add some more complicated ones to kind of talk about the scripting part of it. At the top, I can see calculation, constraint, and validation. Even though it will look like you can add a validation rule, you can't. So don't let that fool you. You'll get an error when you try to save it. And I wish there was a way they could block that out so you don't think that you have that option. I got excited when I thought I had that option and did not. So I'm going to hit add rule. And again, we're going to do an immediate calculation rule. And then over here is, oh, that didn't get bigger, the data that we need to fill out. So I'm going to copy and paste this so you don't have to watch me type. So what I'm going to do first is calculate longitude and latitude, and that's because their scripts are pretty easy. So you have to give it a name. That is the only thing, the name is the only thing that you cannot change once you save the rule. So if you want to change the name, you'll have to delete it and then re-enter it. We like to put a description just so we know what we intended to do with this rule. So this is going to perform a calculation on insert and update that will populate the field long with the address point's longitude value. So I don't have any subtypes. We're going to skip over that. I'm going to tell it which fields and then enter the expression. So this one is easy. Because this client keeps their data in WGS84, then the geometry X is going to export. It's going to calculate the latitude and the longitude. If you're in a different schema, you'll get a different result for that. So that tells it what to calculate, and then we need to tell it when to fire. So I want this to happen on insert when I create a new point, and also on update so that as I move that point, that field will update. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to add one more to calculate the latitude. And then this one, I'm just looking for the geometry. What I didn't do in the other one, and probably should have, is you can open up the expression and just make sure that you've that it's valid. Similarly, I want insert and update. I'm going to hit save. So now I want to show you what that looks like in action. So I'm going to go. This happens to be near my neighborhood. I don't happen to live on Easy Street, though that would be pretty cool if I did. So if I select this address point and we go look at its lat and long, it ends in 72 and 65. I'm going to make an update to that. And then go back and look. So now I'm 22 and 1. So that updated automatically, which was great. Also, if I create a new address point, and I look at its attributes, this is where our defaults are already populated. So we've got some of that information pre-populated. And then down here, that longitude and latitude were calculated. So that is how those simple ones work. I am going to now show a different one. Let me go back to save those. Let's go back to the rules. I am also going to ask, I think we'll have time. I've got a couple to show you here, and then I'd love if you guys have one that you'd like me to try. If you want to put that in the chat, I will try to do that too. I can't promise I can make it work on the fly, but I will give it a shot. Okay, so this one, we talked about having two sets of fields. So we've got the state, the spelled out fields, and then the legacy fields that are abbreviated. So the next one I want to show you is how to calculate that legacy pre-direction based on the you having populated or changed the pre-direction that's already spelled out. So I'm going to add a new rule. And this one is called legacy pre-direction calculation. And it's just a calculation rule populating the legacy direction field based on the spelled out pre-direction field. So I have to tell it what field. And then this expression is a little bit more complicated. What we use for these, actually I'll get into it, is a decode function. So we're telling it to look in this spelled out fields and then decode it and then return the decoded value. So if it finds north, it's going to return N. If it finds south, it's going to return south. If it doesn't find any of those, then it's going to leave it null. So I'm going to check that. And we want this to happen on insert and update as well, because if it was wrong to begin with, or if we have, for whatever reason, the road name changed, we want that to happen in both of those situations. Okay, so let's edit this guy. Let's actually say, for whatever reason, all of these need to have a pre-direction. So I'm going to go to the attributes, click up here. So I've got all of them selected. And then I'm going to go to my pre-directional, and I'm going to make it east. So notice it doesn't change right away. This does not happen until you hit apply. If I had auto apply turn on, then it would happen right away. So I'm going to hit apply, and now you can see that that legacy street direction is populated. I also happen to be labeled based on the legacy field, so you can see that change happened automatically. But let's say we're in a different area, but we want this to be west, so I'm just going to go say west, and then those change automatically. So that really leverages you only having to change the data in one spot, and you can put it in as many spots as you want. I'm going to save those. All right, I don't see any suggestions. Last chance if you want to add a suggestion to a rule. Like I said earlier too, you could do this in reverse. If you wanted to maintain these legacy fields and have this west populate the word west, you can do that too. You just have to flip your decode code around and then switch the attributes that it's looking for. Okay, so no suggestions. So I'm going to go with creating the global ID that the state requires. So these would work on road Centerlines. It's just easier to do them. Oops, here. Don't need that table. I need this one. So I'm going to add a rule, immediate calculation. This one is called address points NGUID. And it creates a new NENA compliant ID when a site address point is created. So this one's different in that we would not want that to update when we edit that point, because that ID should stay the same. So I'm going to go find the ID field and then the expression that we use. So this one in particular also requires you to have created a database sequence. So it will pick the next one in a row, but it's keeping track of that at the database level. So I've already done that. I've called a database sequence this site underscore NGUID. So it's going to add the word site to that number, and then afterwards put the suffix, which in this case is at Tezwell911.com. So that allows you to change. I can copy this same rule for the road center lines and just change that prefix there. And I would also at that point change the place where it's pulling that number from. So I'm gonna do that. And again, this one I only want to happen on insert because I don't want it to change after after it's been assigned. So I'm going to hit save here. Also, occasionally I was better about saving my edits, but if you have unsaved edits in a map and you come over here and you make all your changes, this saved will be grayed out and it'll tell you why it's, actually I think it's this generic error, but the first thing to check if that is grayed out and you have changes you want to save is if you have edits over here that haven't been saved. Okay, so I'm going to create a new point. I'll look at the attributes here. So as I create that one, I get sites, the number 1198, and then my suffix. If I create another one, it's going to add one more to it. So what's nice about that is that we're not keeping track. The object ID is hard to rely on to make sure that it's unique, because if you export that, then obviously those object IDs get reset. So this is a way to keep these sequential and unique without relying on the object ID, which won't always work. And then if I look back at this one, so that was 1200. If I move it, I've made edits to it, but it is still 1200. So that's kind of how those controls work. I love that you can control when those fire. It makes them useful in a lot of different situations. Does anybody have any questions? I got just a couple more slides that I want to get through. If you can let me know if you have questions, that would be great. Kind of move my screen here. All right, so I don't see any, so we'll fly through these. I wanted to do a quick overview because I did mention these kind of 4 types of rules if you split calculation rules into immediate and batch. Immediate calculation and constraints you can do as long as you're in Pro and you have a file geodatabase. But where you get to the batch and the validation, those are only available to you if you're in Pro 2.6 and above, you have Enterprise 10.7 and above, and your feature service is branch versioned, which again is a new thing, but is very powerful. And I think more and more of Esri's tools will start to use that. Thanks for your attention today. Again, my name's Erin. Bill will be reaching out to you